Hello, George Warren, Hampson for Fulham. It's actually a quick question to Owen. I'm sorry, you just thought you sat down. With regards to your last project, I actually started noticing the dates that keep on coming up with regards to the consultation. From the point at which you thought of this, how far on are we now, and does that have an impact with regards to funding? Because normally we look in sort of 1 year cycles.
I always knew it was going to be a long project. I always had that in my head. With the death added burden funding, there's no accountants in here, is there? I used flexibility in making sure the budget was available after financial year close. What with me leaving in October and certain things, ideally it should have been delivered before last Christmas, but it will be delivered this Christmas, as I'm looking at Kevin. Yeah. But the money is there, so but that had always been planned for. It wasn't going to be a quick 1 year project. There's no way you can deliver that, not with that level of engagement.
Hi, Ian Hingley from a consultancy called Movement. It's a question generally for the London people, I guess. Have you had any dealings with TfL in relation to installation of SuDS on their infrastructure? And I'd be interested to know if you have and what their response has been.
For me, it's very simple. No.
Well, I won't say a blanket no. We did have quite a lot of discussions with TfL Surface Transport, so the people who manage the bus fleet and all the bus garages and stuff. And yeah, they were broadly supportive. I mean, that's obviously much wider than the scope of the Counters Creek trial. So you know, we haven't progressed that any further. But yeah, they were very keen to talk to us. The TfL streets do have quite a lot of reservations about, you know, things like red routes being permeably paved, and obviously anything that intrudes into the carriageway. But I think, you know, lots of organisations are lobbying them quite hard, so it is something they look at. But we personally haven't managed to construct anything in a TfL street so far.
Rob Whittaker, Environment Agency. Question for Jeremy, actually. You mentioned by 2020 you were looking to free up capacity for 25,000 properties. I wondered how you calculated how much surface water you needed to remove to equate to a certain number of properties.
The first thing is we're not looking to free up capacity for 25,000 properties. That's the target of what we want to remove. It's quite a simple calculation, really, in that we started off with the volumes that we wanted to remove, and then we did an analysis of all the houses in Wales, what the roof and impermeable area was for average throughout Wales, and then based on the average rainfall in Wales, which is variable, we calculated what that volume was and equated it back then to what that meant in terms of houses.
Thanks.
As I've got the microphone, maybe I can ask a question. Kevin, with the schemes you've done, what would be the 3 key learning points that you would have for any London local authority thinking about retrofitting?
I guess one thing is not to think in silos. Sometimes there are locations where someone might be contemplating a highway SuDS intervention, but locally there might be a really good example of a green space in between social flats, which for a vastly reduced sum of money you could actually achieve massively more benefit on the combined sewer. So I think, you know, that kind of, the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and sort of departmental sort of thinking, I think is really required for SuDS. I think engaging positively, I think that's come up a number of times through today. It's something we believe very strongly in. It's not about asking people what they want. Ford fell into this trap. I think it was in the 80s or 90s. They used to have what they call public clinics, where they asked people, they gave them models of cars and asked which they preferred, and basically they preferred the one most like the cars that are out at the moment. So Ford went through a real period where their design was just awful. And then they realized, well, actually the role of the designer is to understand what the buyer doesn't know he actually wants yet until you produce it for him. And I think the kind of engagement process is about drawing out the needs of a community, trying to understand, get under the skin of a community, trying to really understand what they're about, and then the design respond to that. And I think in that way you get really positive engagement from people, and not only will they tend to look after it in terms of not vandalize it, they might actually actively take part in some of the construction, as we were seeing with the Thames Water projects, where we've got people planting, we've got people doing clearance days, woodland clearance, and they will be there to police it and look after it into the future. That's probably two.
Hi, Fowler Ogunyore from Royal Haskell in DHV. Probably start with Kevin and probably be of Tabitha, really. I, particularly because Bob and I slaved over Lamb Drove about 10 years ago, when even though we managed to get 2 days, one day at the beginning of the work to have a good workshop with the contractors, tell them everything they need to know, and one day sometime, which you have to choose carefully to come to site to check what they're doing, they still did a lot of things that just showed they don't understand SuDS. But it's actually nice to see in the sort of type of scheme where you're actually able to get the contractors who will be looking after it later, which does put that onus a bit on them. I just wonder the general thoughts of people about that importance of proper supervision, again, not just 1 or 2 days, but proper supervision of that, and what your experience is of how common it is that people are realizing that, in terms of clients or in the industry at the moment.
I mean, I think as a landscape architect, I've been seeing a pressure to reduce fees, and often that is on that tail end of the project through construction. There's often a pressure to, especially if a developer's happy with a contractor that they've used on many similar schemes before, and they kind of know they can roll it out. So we're often under pressure to, do reduced supervision. And as I said, with SuDS schemes, the same sort of anticipation is there. But yeah, it's absolutely essential. But I think what we're finding is if you find a contractor that does good work, hang on to them. And I know we have all this kind of competitive tendering process, but do whatever you can to kind of keep those guys on board. And I think for contractors, it's a massive opportunity as well, because if you can prove yourself that you can deliver SuDS and deliver it well, it's only going to grow. We're at this kind of this sort of part of an exponential curve. So it's massive opportunities for them as well.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and that's the very reason that we identified that site supervision is essential, and it's certainly something I wouldn't de-scope from the budget, and I'm in charge of the budget, so it will stay in. And we're expecting at least 2 days a week supervision, so not just at the beginning and at the end. And so yes, it was a lesson that we saw needed to be learned even before you gave me the nice collaboration and corroboration that it is definitely something we'll retain.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's just been said, but I'd go further, and I'd say it needs enhanced supervision, greater than the normal amount of supervision, because the normal amount of supervision are in areas where people know how to do it and they still get it wrong. SuDS is in areas where they don't know how to do it, and it's not so much that they're deliberately doing it wrong, they just don't know how to do it. And just going on from that, is that who is doing the supervision? Well, it'd be fine for Kevin to go out there and do the supervision, but just having your normal site engineer type of guy doing the supervision, because he doesn't know either. So you have to have enhanced supervision from the people who've done the design and truly understand how it's supposed to be working, at least until, I'd say, about 2020. We might be there by then.
Can I just get a quick follow-up? Owen, when you were talking, you actually said, you sort of picked your team. I like those guys and I got them to do the design, I got them to do that. How do you do that? Because I can't seem to get any sort of local authority to, even when they want to use you, they still have to go out and pick the cheapest. So how do you do it?
Turn the mic off.
Within local authority, you obviously have procurement rules, and you just need to follow those procurement rules. There's always flexibility within procurement. You have the ability for waivers, and as long as you can get your business case and justify that, then at the end of the day, all procurement want is to make sure that they're not going to get bitten by audit. It's really that simple. As for the contractor, the people who deliver at the moment, apart from the last scheme, they don't seem to, they've forgotten the specification. The first couple were quite hard to get, but it's been the same gang, and the gang's been consistent. Now, I know that another borough might be looking at that gang, because they use the same contractor. But again, from my experience, for not just doing this, but with traffic schemes and what have you, you tend to pick up, or you realise which gangs will deliver you the quality. For me, it's never been about the speed. I'm happy to pay that little bit extra just to get that gang, because I know that they will deliver that product. And that's where I'd rather be.
Helen Spring, London Wildlife Trust. With a question for Tabitha and David, with the Counters Creek project, you mentioned the street level SuD projects that you're working on, but you also mentioned projects in the houses as well, or some kind of water efficiency or SuDS interventions in the houses. I was wondering what they were.
Yes, we're doing both public realm and private realm. And so the private realm we're doing is, as you heard, I de-scoped the green roofs from the private realm, but we will be doing permeable paving in people's front gardens and also water butts and water attenuation tanks.
Is that sufficient?
Yeah, thank you.
Graham Fairhurst, it's a comment really rather than a question, I think, but I'd be interested in reaction from the panel. First of all, I'd like to compliment all the presenters. I think we've had some excellent presentations. All of them were excellent, and not just the way they were presented, the content has been really exciting and inspirational, I think. We've seen some really good stuff today. So credit to everybody who's presented. I wouldn't want to single any one presenter out, actually. I think there's such good content all around there. My comment is I feel that we're actually now starting on quite an exciting journey here, and that we're approaching this, most people in this room, from the point of view of drainage people interested in SuDS, wanting to see SuDS move forward, but understanding that retrofit has an important role to enable development and help us resolve existing flooding problems or alleviate them. But within this mix, and Owen's in this, are other issues about the public realm, how the public realm looks, works, and is a nicer place to be in urbanised environments. And particularly with regard to traffic safety, pedestrians, reducing the presence of the car as a dominating force in towns, placemaking and these sorts of things. And I am quite keen on the comments, really, if you have, as to how we can glue the other drivers together into this to make it a much more powerful movement, really, to try and get good joined-up thinking is, I suppose, the phrase, where we're dealing with the rainwater, but we're putting chicanes and rain gardens in positions in roads which are optimal for traffic management and creating a space for some benches for the old people to sit in, things like that. And I'm quite keen that we're in an interesting area and the start of a movement, and I'm interested in what comments come from the panel.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there is so much opportunity. I think the TfL question was quite interesting because we've, as an organisation, had conversations around SuDS, and I know there is within TfL, within certain design elements of the street team, there is interest in SuDS. And I think one real sort of good starting point is just the sort of funding spectrum. So being able to have that sort of less siloed effect of going to local authorities and being able to put a scheme forward, working with the transport team, working with the flooding team, and everybody pooling their financial opportunities together to deliver schemes like the Green Street scheme. I mean, in Portland and Seattle and in San Francisco, it's just a given that you put in a cycle lane down a street and it will have SuDS built into it, or you put in a new neighborhood traffic calming scheme and SuDS will be an integral element of that. And just in terms of talking to local people about that, they see that as value for money. They see that you're coming in and you're delivering placemaking, sustainable drainage and traffic calming all at the same time. And when people are very local residents, can often be quite critical of how local authorities spend money. But if they're seen to be spending money in a really cost-effective way, where they're getting 3 things for the price of 1, or 3 elements for 1 sort of construction disruption, they think that's great. So I think, yeah, being able to pool those resources and get different teams within local authorities working together and pooling their resources is a really good way forward.
It's a very good question, and I'm sure Tabitha and David will agree that when looking at it from the perspective of water companies, they're really constrained by the fact that they can't actually do any capital investment in unless they're investing customer money on a capital project that is positive. And one of the biggest impediments when you're dealing with SuDS is trying to show that the SuDS scheme stacks up from a financially positive way of looking at it. Now, the way in which we did it in ARM5, which is the regulatory period that we're currently in, is the only way that we could justify it was by showing that if we started using surface water removal techniques, that they would deliver a cheaper option than traditional approaches, because Ofwat understood the traditional approaches of bigger pipes, more storage. So you had to actually beat the traditional approach before you could actually move forward to actually do the scheme. Now, what the contractors found is that initially in the early years, they were reticent to move that way because they know concrete, they know pipes, they know how to deliver them. They know that they can make a profit. But they also found that using surface water reduction techniques, that they were making a profit out of that as well. And towards the end of the AMP period, which we're into now, they're now starting to see that using SuDS, they can also make a profit as well. So they're satisfying the regulatory pressures that we have by using SuDS, so that the whole idea that SuDS are expensive is a myth. And in actual fact, provided you're doing them well and you do them in the correct way, they actually deliver much better benefits. But I would say this, that it's very difficult to do them when you're looking at a very, very small part of the catchment. You need to look at it on a much bigger basis of the catchment. And the bigger you make it, the more profitable they become. And incidentally, when compared against the equivalent investment that would be needed, which was around 600 million on a traditional scheme, the surface water reduction scheme came out 25% of that, which would be needed over a long period of time. By the time we go to AMP6, we're now in a different regime where we're not measuring by outputs, we're measuring by outcomes. And the outcomes that we are delivering on is the amount of surface water that we're removing from the network and the effect over a long term that that will have on the system. I'm sorry, it's a long answer. But added to that, if you combine with the collaboration with Cardiff on Grangetown, what you then find is that the softer measures like societal value completely outweigh the traditional values within the water company. So the values of health and well-being, societal value, community benefit outweigh the values that reduce pumping costs and things like that are giving you. The payback when you start looking at the multiple benefits gives you a payback on those schemes, which we can't be certain, but is between 3 and 10 years. If you go to any bank and say that you want to do a scheme which is going to pay back between 3 and 10 years, even the most reticent of banks, I think, would be interested in that. So the multiple benefits is an extremely important part of the whole financial structure. And Syria currently, we developed a model with the help of Montgomery Watson, and Chris is sitting over there. Some of his guys helped us with it. We developed a model for our financial business plan in this particular business plan, but Syria as well are working, and we're part of that project that are looking at the multiple benefits that should be delivered. And I don't know if, Paul, do you want to say anything on that? Have I said enough on it?
I think you have, yeah.
I just wanted to add, I think going back to the question about linking up different drivers and different benefits and funding, I think very often we do take that for granted, that everyone sees all the benefits. You know, I mean, the design workshop with Hammersmith and Fulham, where sounds like the whole council was there, basically. You know, hats off to George for getting so many departments in one meeting. But certainly when I started talking to organisations about SuDS, you know, I would reel off all the various benefits that Jeremy has just mentioned and expect, you know, a rapturous response. But, you know, you have to appreciate there are very often sort of organisational barriers to realising all those synergies. Very often people have gone on a long journey to justify and scope a project that, you know, they see some very narrow benefits for, and they're very reluctant to try and jeopardise those by opening it out more widely in case it sort of hinders them. But I mean, you know, so one example was the Molina Road, Kathna Park SuDS. There is a park adjacent to our retrofit pilot, and it won Pocket Parks funding from the Mayor recently. And one of the ticks in the box for it was the fact that it was linked to our flood alleviation scheme, because that was one of the criteria that the Mayor put on the funding criteria. And I think, you know, there needs to be a lot more of that, just simple prompts. Yeah, just creating those hurdles for people who are applying for any kind of funding. To say, have you also considered X, Y, Z? Have you, are you delivering any of these other benefits? It takes very little. It's pretty much just the design of a form and a scoring process for funding. But, you know, don't assume that people will, when someone who's committed to creating a wetlands for biodiversity, don't take it for granted that they'll be considering the flood risk benefit or the anti-pollution benefit. Prompt them and make it something that people have to consider, or at least consider even if it's then eliminated.
Okay, thank you. I did notice one more question at the back. Is it a quick one there, or the lady? Yes, yourself.
Very, very
Yeah, we'll make it a quick one, and then I'm going to literally do a 60-second wrap-up with some key themes, and I'll let you get on your way. But yes, quick question.
I'm Claire Thirlwell, I'm a landscape architect. I run my own consultancy, Thirlwell Associates. It was just a point really about contractors, and a lot of people who are involved in the construction industry don't understand working in 3D. And I think actually sometimes we do a 2D plan and give it to somebody, and they don't actually understand what they're looking at. So the outfall structure, they probably, you know, it's just the fact they didn't really understand it. And also perhaps in the procurement process we could include someone demonstrating the level of accuracy that they can work to, because saying that, you know, the average tolerances in the landscape industry can be quite large. Part of the procurement process could be demonstrating that you can actually produce an as-designed scheme on site. Those are my two very minor points.
Thank you. A quick
the criticism of my detail. No, that was just an extract of the detail. I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of our details have isometrics as well for exactly that reason. Even though they're construction details and people are used to working either plan or section, we find isometrics very quickly give contractors an idea of what's going on. To be honest, there were no excuses for that outlet.
Great, thank you. Okay, I did promise a 60-second wrap-up, and I will do that now. There's a few really key themes that have come out of there for me, and I've noted a number of things down, but I'm just going to pick them off very quickly. I think one is the starting point could be blame your water company, and it's probably the cheapest option, but probably not going to get you where you want to go. But I think the thing that really struck me was around setting a vision and actually developing that vision and taking people with you, taking the community with you, taking the contractors with you. And there are a lot of organisations out there, I know you mentioned Groundwork, Ben, you know, who have very like-minded objectives as an organisation. They're able to come on board and help with these things. So setting a vision and taking people with you and developing that right through to fruition is very important. It's not going to get rid of all the hurdles along the way, but at least it gets people in a direction of travel. I think the other thing that struck me was something that Jeremy said, and it was I'm not sure I got the figure right, but yeah, I think he said that 6% of the benefits, you know, in future will, you know, can come from new developments of SuDS. In actual fact, a vast majority of the benefits will come from retrofitting of SuDS. And that's something that, you know, I hadn't appreciated. Certainly when I came into this room, I think I saw retrofitting of SuDS in a box that's labelled too hard to do, really. Whereas I think I'm going to leave this room thinking, actually, it might be really hard to do, but the significant benefits really outweigh the too hard to do element of it. A couple of other things, really. Multi-agency input, the taking the community with you and getting them engaged through different means is very key. The supervision of the scheme right through struck me as something that's essential to get it right. And I do like, in terms of the pilot project, the idea of, you know, getting that monitoring really right from the very outset, is understanding what you're starting with, the hydraulics, the nature of the hydraulics at the start, how that's changed through the interventions, and then at the end going back and being clear as to what the impact of those interventions are on the hydraulics. Because I think there's a lot of disbelievers out there, people who just say, actually, you talk a good talk, but I don't really get it, I don't really believe it. But I think having really hard evidence around that and being able to demonstrate is really important. And I think it is, as a community of people who work in this area, of course, you know, today is about sharing that experience. And I think, you know, where we can document it and reuse it, to help convince people of this journey, I think that's really, really good. The long-term maintenance issue has come up, and I won't dwell on it, but that, I guess, will always be a challenge, and I think it's something we need to think about. But that's all I'll say. I do want you to join me in just thanking the speakers in the usual way. So my personal thanks, Tabitha, David, Owen, Kevin, Ben and Jeremy for coming out and putting their presentations together.